Greetings all. Welcome back to the Coptimizer Podcast. Another exciting episode. I have street cop, street sergeant, street stoic on the line. Steve, thanks for being here.
Thanks. It's great to be here. I'm glad we got to sit down and do this.
Yeah, we had a fun pre-conversation a few weeks ago, and we were just, before we went live here, we were just saying we should have just recorded that.
Yeah, we'd have been done by now.
Yeah. But, we're cops, right? We're not necessarily the smartest knuckle draggers on the planet. So sometimes repetition is the key.
I'm not here because I got A's in high school, right? Like,
all right. Well, hey, why don't you kick us off by telling the audience a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get right into it.
Sure. My name's Steve Sweeting. I am a sergeant at a mid-sized law enforcement agency in North Central Florida, and I don't normally talk about where I'm from. Say what my agency is, but if you came to my town and you wanted to see a Tim Tebow statue, we have plenty of Tim Tebow statues. And if you wanted to maybe see an alligator or swamp, you could come here and we'd be able to hook you up. So I've been there about going on 18 years now, and pretty much patrol the whole time. Midnight shift, college town, Florida. We've had a lot of fun experiences, and I've learned a lot of things the hard way. So,
well, I'm in Lafayette, West Lafayette, here in Indiana, home of the Purdue Boilermakers. So I wanted to make a joke when you were referencing where you're from, like, oh, so you're from Tallahassee, right?
Yeah, right. I mean, if you want me to end this interview right now, call me a Seminole.
Well, yeah. While I am a Hoosier from Indiana, I am not an Indiana Hoosier. I'm a Boilermaker. That's all good. Yeah, policing in university towns or adjacent to university towns it can always be a little bit interesting.
Absolutely.
I digress. So, you've been working the street and working midnight shifts. Are you still working midnight shifts?
I am. I am still on midnight shift.
All right. How many years is that now?
This is 17 and some change.
Nice. You got me beat. There's not too many people I've chatted with that have me beat, but I knew guys that did their entire careers on midnights, though.
Well, and my wife would prefer I go to day shift, and it'll probably happen one of these days pretty soon. But yeah, I love it. I love the people. I love the work, and midnight shift. You constantly get the newer officers, right? Because they don't get to go anywhere else. They have to come to mid. So I'm always in the cycle of like training, getting somebody spun up. And about the time I get them right where they need to be, they go off to a specialty unit or they have enough seniority and go off to day shift. So I like to say, I am the training division of all the other divisions in the agency, so.
Well, and as any true midnight cop will say, the night fighters, it's like, well, this is where all the real work gets done. Everybody else is, just along for the ride, right?
Right. Yeah. We definitely get the crazy stuff. But to tell you the truth, like I can work a homicide or a robbery like nobody's business. It doesn't even raise my blood pressure anymore. But if you ask me to write a parking ticket, I would be lost in the sauce. Like there's just some things like I can't do. Yeah.
So, all right. So let's get a few of these things out of the way, and because we do want to come back to this when we get into your book and in your journey into Stoicism, but prior to that, right? One of the things that I've been in several conversations with on the show is about this new generation of cop, about how much different they are. And, the question becomes, are they really that much different? And now I'll start with, there was a time when like a lot of agencies work 12-hour shifts, a lot will work 8-hour shifts. So you have 3 shifts in a day and some work 10-hour shifts.
Right.
Either way, it's 24 hours in a day. Somebody's got to work overnight. And it seems, right, so some of the crusty, salty veterans will tell you that, oh man, all I ever wanted to do was work nights until they made me go to a different shift.
Right.
But now this generation is there have been times where we've had brand new officers that have been forced to go to day shift because the night shifts have filled up.
Hmm.
And when we do shift bid, so they actually have to go to day shift.
We're seeing that
Which
too for the first time in forever. Is Yeah, it's weird. You'll have brand new officers on days, which never happened before. But I think the saltier older guys, are starting to say, you know what, night, appreciating what they have and knowing, night shift is where it's at, and they don't want to give that up for the new guys. So yeah, that's interesting.
and I've mentioned this a few times now. Outside of my tenure as a chief, obviously as a chief, I worked day shift, but I can say that I worked my entire career without ever working a day shift in patrol assigned to the patrol division on day shift, which is kind of weird, thinking
Yeah.
back. Like I did like my first 10, it was like 10 years on nights, outside of, well, it was longer than that, but outside of like when I got promoted to sergeant, they pulled me off nights and made me work afternoons. And then it was like four in the afternoon to midnight, which generally you then wind up working until like 2 in the morning anyway. So
Right.
it was kind of like a pseudo night shift, but it still wasn't a day shift.
Yeah, and that's basically what they did to me. I got promoted, and chief called me and said, "Hey, next week you're sergeant. Congratulations, and you're going to be on day shift." And at that point, I'd been on midnights for 14, 15 years. So I was like, "Oh, all right. Well, I guess if I'm going to take the promotion, I got to go to days, and that comes with the territory." And yeah, I did it for 2 months until we had our shift pick. Then I got promptly pushed right back to mids, and I was you know, uh, like, please don't throw me into briar patch. Please don't do that. So right back to mids, right back where I was comfortable, and been there ever since. So
Well, night shift is just different. One of the things that's always hard to get used to when you work days compared to nights is just traffic, just
right,
everyday life. Things, it just takes longer to get places. Uh, you know, People wave to you, they smile at you, they do things like that. Like on the night shift, you don't see as much of that kind of thing. But
no,
uh,
it's you see the old Superman like comic books and cartoons, and Bizarro Land, like where everything's different. That's what day shift feels like to me. It's like, why is this guy waving at me? Did somebody just get robbed? Like, what's happening?
yeah. Well, now, since this is the Coptimizer podcast and we're talking about cop optimization,
Okay.
now here's the downside, right? Here's the part that where we maybe need to spend a little bit of time and think about, maybe it is time to go to day shift if you're starting to think about longevity and how working nights, how working shift work can negatively impact your long-term well-being. If there's really kind of no two ways about it. Working nights, working against your circadian rhythm, even if you're a night owl and not a lark, not a morning type
Right.
person, um, there are things that you really need to do to make sure that you're protecting your sleep time and that you're getting good sleep. And that is very difficult to do when you're working nights, especially if you work an active shift, if you work a lot of cases, if you're getting subpoenaed a lot. And then, really how agency training and everything, the rest of the world operates on a daytime schedule. So
Right.
there are only a few professions that really focus on a nighttime schedule. And generally people on that day shift forget or just
Oh
generally
yeah.
assume that everybody else is like them.
Oh yeah. And uh, I like to think that I hack midnights pretty well, and I enjoy it. But I have struggled with the mood shifts, the lack of sleep. I've gained a lot of weight, lost a lot of weight, gained a lot of weight, lost a lot of weight. Uh, I been through pretty much every bit of that negative stuff that comes along with the shift work and the midnights. And yeah, it probably trimmed a couple of years off of my life, overall. So it's, you know, I always tell people when it comes to midnight shift, if you're going to be on it, you have to commit. You have to just 100% say, I am a nighttime person now. And because I think where people have most of the trouble is they try to do too much. They try to be up during the day. They try to do all their normal activities, catch a nap, and then somehow work all night too. And something's going to give at some point. Me personally, I'm pretty good at excluding everything and just saying, don't call me. I'm turning off my phone, blacking out the room, turning on the noise machine, and just tuning out from the world. But a lot of people can't do that. They can't make that separation. I know one guy who crashed his car, and he was so tired, and I was like, why'd you, what was the problem? He's like, well, I had to keep letting my dogs out. So, man, who is in charge of your life? You or the dogs, right? um, so yeah, it's a commitment, if you're going to do it long term.
Yeah. Well, since we're on the subject, let's just, so if you're someone that's been working nights for a while and you're listening to this, or you're getting ready to go to nights, let's just get some pointers and some tips out of the way right now. And here's what I tell everyone that's going to night shift. It'll be some of the funnest work and the most rewarding work that you'll do. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. I loved my time on night shift. And it was really, and I've talked about this a couple of times, where I knew I was probably done for, because I started with the police department when I was 27. But when I went into the service right out of high school, I worked security police. So I was working a 6 on 3 off schedule, where I worked 3 days from 4 to midnight, 3 days then from midnight to 8 a.m. And then I would have 3 days off. And then I repeated that. And so I was young though, right? And when you're young, you can absorb a lot of this, but sometimes you don't know up from down. And then there was a time where I was working 8-hour shifts, where I worked 2 day shifts, then 2 afternoon shifts, then 1 midnight shift, and then 2 days off. Wow. So yeah, that was brutal. I don't know whose dumb idea that was, but even as a young person, I didn't know up from down. And, I found myself like falling asleep at really odd times, and just, so at a young age, I was exposed to what a repetitive poor sleep cycle can do for you. But yeah, then I went to college, and when I got out of the service, I went to college and I bartended. So I worked nights. So I was working almost 40 hours a week at night. So I was up at school during the day, and then I would, a lot of times you're working 6 at night to 2 in the morning when you're working in a bar. Now that was a lot of fun. It created some of the challenges, but so when I rolled into policing, it was kind of like, I'm going to like working nights. Yeah, that's just what I've done. I mean, people are like, oh, do you think you'll be able to do that? I'm just like, well, why wouldn't I?
Right.
Like, I really
when else am I supposed to be awake?
Yeah. And there was some other extracurricular activities in my youth that kept me up at, probably way too late at night, but all those things catch up to you. Now, what the point I was getting to was when I turned like 40, I was going through staff and command school, and it was 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. So it's a 3-month school, so that pushes that school out to a 6-month time frame.
Right.
So I was working midnight shifts, so I was working 2 weeks on midnights, and then going to school during the day in the classroom for 2 weeks. And we had 3 kids, and our youngest was just a couple months old at the time. So when I went back to work at the end of that 6 months, shortly thereafter, I went to work narcotics. And so that was, again, that was more of an evening night schedule for the most part, but I didn't know which way it was up. And that like your one of your officers saying he crashed his car. I've told this story a few times. There was one day I lived 13.1 miles from my driveway to the PD. And there was one day I found myself sitting in my car at the end of my driveway.
No idea.
With my foot on the brake, cars running. And I had no idea how I got there. I don't remember the drive home. And that was the point where I was like, okay, this is not good. Like
I have done that. Yeah.
It can be a little scary. You're like, oh man, I'm glad I didn't crash into anybody or hurt somebody or hurt myself for that matter.
Well, and that was like after you were 40, right? That
Mhm.
when you and that the kids these days, they have a saying, they say it just hits different, and after 40, man, that just hits different. Changing your schedule and being up all night, it is a different beast altogether. So
So you mentioned it at your house, and then so when you're protecting your schedule and you
yes,
work during the night and you're trying to sleep during the day, you really do have to do things like put tinfoil or whatever it takes on your windows. People
yeah,
think you got a little grow operation going in your
oh
bedroom,
yeah,
when it's just because you're trying to keep all the light out. And that would be my number one recommendation for people is you got to stick to the schedule.
that's right,
As much as possible. Go to bed at the same time. Try to wake up at the same time. Make sure you are in complete darkness with a noisemaker, a fan,
yes,
and try to keep the room that you're sleeping as cool as possible.
right, exactly, cool and
Yeah.
dark. Get that noise machine, and also a very strict workout routine will help you a lot. If you just wake up, it doesn't matter if you're waking up in the afternoon time. Just what would a normal person do? They would wake up, they would eat their breakfast, they would go do their morning workout, and then they would go to work. You have to do the same thing. You have to, you know, have a normal routine and don't just go about the whims of whatever everybody wants you to do. Just say, hey, this is how I'm living my life and this is what I do. And that way, when you go to lay down in the morning, you're actually tired. You're physically and mentally tired and not just, mentally tired. So,
So one of the things that we like to do as cops is most of us like to drink coffee. And when you're working
right.
a night shift, it's easy to drink a lot of coffee. Coffee is high in cortisol.
Yes.
So cortisol is generally your body starts to produce cortisol early in the morning as when you wake up, and that's the energy time of the day. So artificially uh, kicking that process off or trying to sustain that process now can be detrimental to sleep. And caffeine generally has like a half life of like 6 to 12 hours. So if you drink a cup of coffee, it really you could have that, depending on how much caffeine is in there, depending on how your body processes caffeine.
Right.
So if you go to work at 10 o'clock at night and you drink coffee until 2 in the morning, um,
Right.
you're really looking at 2 in the afternoon, noon to 2 in the afternoon the next day before your body has processed all that caffeine. So if you're going to bed at 8 or 9 in the morning, your first few
Right.
hours of sleep, you're not getting deep sleep. And the first 90 minutes is generally when you get the most deep sleep. We don't need to make this podcast about sleep, but
No.
you get into these sleep cycles,
Yeah.
and that's when you start to see, your brain goes through a flushing when you get into REM sleep, or the storing of information. There's a
Absolutely.
lot of
Yeah.
very important stuff that happens during sleep. So let's just end it by saying this: do what you can to protect your sleep. There's some great books out there.
Sure.
Um, I would say Matthew Walker's book, Why We Sleep, is probably the best sleep. He's probably one of the world's best experts on sleep. Doc Kirk Parsley's got some great information. Sean Stevenson. There's a few others that I've read. I've read a lot about sleep, but you can't
Well,
go
and
backwards in time.
yeah, and I'll say this just before we get off the topic is, the young guys, they live off these energy drinks, and I don't know if you've had one of these monsters or bang energy drinks, in the last couple of years, but that is high octane stuff. Uh, and they wonder why they drink that all night and then they can't get to sleep in the morning, or when they do have that citizen encounter and all of a sudden they're getting all emotional and they're yelling and they're getting shaky and they're not in very good control. And it's, well, you're jacking your adrenal system up, artificially with these just high powered energy drinks. And then you wonder why, you're so shaky and so on edge. It's just get some good sleep and don't lean on that as a crutch. You'll find that your day probably goes a lot better and you're not so, flying off the handle also.
Yeah. So that's a great segue, right? Because it does really come down to emotional control.
Right.
And emotional control is really as much there's as much physiology involved in this as there is psychology involved in
Right.
this. And you can't separate the two. They are interconnected. Whether and
Right.
so for the people that kind of have that mindset that I can power through, well, you can for a while, but it's not a problem until it's a problem.
Right.
Yeah,
Exactly.
and then it's a
Exactly. Yeah.
problem.
Then it's a real problem. Right.
Yeah,
Right.
and
Yeah.
if you've done something, that is incredibly silly, hopefully it's not something that's going to be a career-ending mistake. But when you're
Correct.
emotionally dysregulated, it's very difficult to make good decisions. And so, from an optimization and a peak performance perspective, you've got to take all these things into consideration.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. Yeah.
was there something in your midnight journey that led you to this journey towards studying the Stoics and this path towards Stoicism? And what was that like? And how do we start down this path?
Sure. I mean, and the story is, I think, probably one that most of the listeners, anybody in law enforcement can probably relate to. And my story isn't very dramatic. Like, I didn't get bit by like a radioactive philosopher, and then the next day I woke up with these superpowers. Like, this took place over the course of several years, and but I was a cop, and on my leadership journey, going from corporal to sergeant, and the last 5 to 7 years have been rough on all of us. And we're having all the civil unrest and all the the media and the war on cops and everything, the defunding, and it just seems like everything was piling up. Meanwhile, all the experienced officers, anybody who could retire was retiring. People that could go to a closet or get out of there, were. So we were losing all of our experience. We're, staffing was hitting the gutter. Meanwhile, crime was going through the roof. And here I am being basically thrust into leadership positions with officers who are young people, well meaning young people, but they don't have any experience. And I had to find a way to lead them. And I had to find a way to show them basically, how to be a police officer, how we do what we do. And I realized pretty quickly that they did not have like the coping skills that you would expect to see out of a seasoned police officer. And, I was struggling with a lot of it. I was getting angry and getting nervous and anxious about, the situations that I'm having to handle. I had already read a couple books that touched on Stoicism from an author called Ryan Holiday, and he wrote a book called Ego is the Enemy. And that was suggested to me by a friend who, when I first got promoted, he's like, hey, don't let your head get big, read this book. But it really opened my world to Stoicism. And I just started, finding myself going back to materials that were Stoic or things like Stoic. So, I also got into Jocko Willink and David Goggins. He has a very Stoic mentality in a lot of ways. And then I went back and read a little more Ryan Holiday and decided I was going to go to the source material. And I bought Meditations off of Amazon. That's Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. And after reading that book, I was sold. I was all in. I found that, oh, wow, this is actually a toolkit. These are all tools that I can use, and these are all things that I can put to work on the job. So I just kind of covertly, secretly started applying it and just said, let me see if I can put these principles to work. I think I understand it after reading a few books. Let me see how that applies to law enforcement. And my results were phenomenal. So, yeah, basically, I just very quietly was in the laboratory, putting the stuff to work and helping officers, helping myself. All my relationships were getting better. I, started losing a bunch of weight. That combined with my, run every day, workout plan, but and more on that later. But yeah, it all started coming together for me, and I just realized that look, this is something that law enforcement officers can really benefit from. And when I started looking for, the people that were teaching stoicism to police officers, I came up pretty dry. There was only one or two things out there, and I realized, all right, now I know what I got to do. I got to get to
Found your
work.
calling.
That's right. So it found me, and it was that was a process of a couple of years of just you know reading the material, practicing it, and then putting it to work. So
So one of the first things that I think that anyone that begins to read the Stoics, the first lesson really is that your problems are not unique.
right, exactly. Uh, and what
And
one thing I think is really fascinating about the Stoics and the Stoic philosophers, and all the things we're going to talk about here, is they wrote this stuff 2,000, 2,300 years ago, and we're sitting here today talking about it on a video conference, and we're going to broadcast this to I don't know, what do you got, millions of listeners?
yeah.
Yeah.
Someday, let's hope, right?
But it's still relevant to us today, and actually it's so useful that I'm amazed that they don't teach us in police academies everywhere.
Well, it's probably time that we do go back and teach some of this at the academy level, because really stoicism is really just about understanding yourself.
Absolutely.
And that was some of the biggest takeaways that I had when I first got into it and when I first got introduced to it. Now, I'm not at the advanced street stoic level that you are, but it's something that I put into practice several years ago, and I can talk a little bit about that. But
Sure.
it's been very beneficial to me as well. And the curious thing about it is it doesn't matter where you are in your journey. It doesn't matter if you're in policing or not. But I think particularly in this time period for cops, for all the reasons that you were talking about, cops do feel like they're on an island, and in
Right.
many cases they are. It's a legitimate feeling. However, some of the problems that can begin to percolate from that we is a little bit of isolationism.
Right.
We begin to think that nobody understands. That closes us off even more. Not even, you know, not just from like the communities that we're working in,
Right.
but even our own agencies among shifts, like
Uh-huh.
day
Yeah.
shifts and night shifts, and
Sure.
detectives and patrol admin and everybody else,
Right.
and then and then even at home, right?
Yes.
And that's where things can really start to accelerate. The doom loop can pick up a lot of velocity, and if you're not careful, it can ruin you. It can suck you in,
Absolutely. Yeah.
and next thing you know, you're that burnout, bitter old cop that you never
Mhm.
wanted to spend time with when you
Right.
were a young officer, right? Like those people, you could pick them out just like that. Like I got
Yeah.
to avoid that person.
Well, exactly. And one comment I'm getting from a lot of people, are reading the book, and they're like, I talk about somebody who does this or does a behavior, and they're telling me, oh yeah, I know that guy. I thought you were writing about this one guy I know, and it's like, no, I think we all have them in our agencies, right? Like,
Mhm.
it's it's almost a natural cycle, and if you're not careful, you're gonna fall into it.
Yeah, well, right. That's the old saying. Be careful about pointing a finger, right? Because
Right?
for every one I point at
Yeah.
you, there's three pointing back at me.
Exactly.
And and there's lesson number one. Oh, I don't know, maybe it's lesson 5 already, 10 on for the episode. But if you find yourself thinking about that about another officer, and this was a mistake, I'll just be flat out honest. Like when I was younger, I was worried about everybody else, and then I never took time to consider the possibility that
Right.
I was a version of that myself. It just depended on
Oh
who
yeah.
was looking at me. And
Oh, same here. Guilty. Guilty. I mean,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, it really is fascinating, and I've learned a ton. So before I get into kind of saying, where I started it, maybe give us an example of when you first started reading this and you first started absorbing it, and how did you put it into practice? What were some of the things? Because it's one thing to read it and be like, oh, okay, that's interesting.
Right.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Now it's another thing to actually put it into practice. What do I do?
So one of the very first, and I won't quote a chapter and verse, but Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. The book begins with probably 10-20% of the book is, oh, there you go.
I'm going to show a copy of it here for
Absolutely.
people that are watching on YouTube. But
And mine is always close at hand too, right?
oh, we have the same. Yeah, we've got the same
Yeah,
one.
we got
That's
the same
cool.
version,
Yeah.
lots of notes. But it starts out, it's a lot of thank yous. It's thank yous and what he's learned from friends and family. He's expressing a lot of gratitude. But when you first get into the meat and potatoes of what he's writing, outside of him basically the acknowledgments he's making, uh, the very first thing in, I think it's book 2, chapter 1, he starts saying, oh, here it is. I found it right here. When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. They're like me because they can't tell good from evil. But I have seen the beauty of good and the ugliness of evil, and I recognize the wrongdoer has a nature related to my own. So he goes on in that chapter, but basically he's saying, this is his personal diary, and he's saying, remember, when you get up today, when you go out and deal with people, they're going to be assholes. But also remember, they're like you are like them. And he goes on to explain that they can't make you have a bad day. They can't make you reply negatively. And all he has to do is remember that they're people too, and treat them accordingly and be a good man, regardless of how somebody else acts. So he starts it out with that verse. And I often read that before I get out of my patrol car, before I go start a shift, before I go into a big meeting where I know people are going to argue and be contentious and, be stabbing each other in the back and trying to one up each other. Like, you already know what's going to happen. If you just expect it and accept it, then your day is going to go better. You know what you're dealing with. That helps me immensely. And that is the first paragraph in the book. And it's given me a huge advantage in life. So yeah, and the rest of it is just hit after hit. I mean, it's amazing philosophy once you get into it.
And it's what over 2,000 years old.
Yes.
So these lessons they're not anything new. And like in this period of policing where things, there is a lot of anti-cop rhetoric. We're in a very, there's a very decisive and divisive environment, in that gap in terms of
Right.
politicization, polarization of policing and communities. So Marcus Aurelius was, he was emperor in a time of plague,
Right.
and so while a lot of people of means moved out of the cities and moved to areas where they could isolate themselves and protect themselves and their family, they had the means to do it. He could have very easily done
Right.
that, and most actually expected that he would, but he never did. He stayed and quite frankly, sold off a lot of the royal family's wealth in order
Yes.
to raise money to help to help keep the empire afloat, so to speak.
Right.
Um, and he lived every day with the constant possibility that he might get sick and he might die. And
Right.
for police officers, they experiencing something very similar, right? You go out every
Right.
night, at least you should, with the realization that this might be it. This, tonight might be my night. It might be
Absolutely.
because of something silly I do, or it might be because of something external that's completely out of my control.
Exactly. And uh, Marcus Aurelius even said, and I'm going to butcher the quote here because that's what I do. I butcher Stoic quotes, at least verbally. In the book they're all pretty accurate. But he said, I can leave this world at any minute. Let that determine what you do and say and think, right? Constantly be aware. You could die any second now. And what do you know, how do you want to go out? What do you want to be known for? What do you want your last words or actions to be? Do you want to be complaining about command staff and bitching in the parking lot, or do you want to be doing something that matters, right? So,
Yeah, it's always it's funny you should bring that up because somebody had posed a question to me recently about actually it was a discussion that it was on LinkedIn, and an officer with the advent of body cameras too, that's just a whole nother added stress for police
yeah.
officers that are out there because
Mm-hmm.
when that thing is turned on, you just are guarded. You're just
Right.
constantly guarded about what you say. And if you're around somebody and you know that they've got a body camera on,
Mm-hmm.
right, then you're just not natural, right? You don't say
No.
things that you normally would. But there's always those times when officers unfortunately leave their cameras.
Oh yeah. Yeah, we got Martin Scorsese, recording every comment, and and it's always the guy that wants to come up and stand
uh,
right beside you, kind of quietly, like you don't know he's there, and you turn around and you're like, "Oh, how long have you been here?" Oh,
well, it's kind of funny. It reminded me when I was in the service, we had this little game that we used to play with each other where you would try to trick somebody into saying something
right.
uh, that they shouldn't probably say, but you would key up your mic. You like kind of have an open mic.
Oh yeah.
Like you get somebody fired up, and then you key your mic up, and then so there's an
Let
open
him
mic
broadcast
that
it.
goes
Yeah.
over the. Well, now with body cameras, sometimes uh, and as a chief, I had, there were times when, things got brought to my attention. And, for me, it's like, look, whether the camera's off or on, I know
Yeah.
there's always going to be times when people agree with me. There's going to be times when they disagree. There's going to be people that like me. There's going to be people that don't like me. And here's a lesson for leaders out there that the Stoics, that would also impart on you, right? Is that you can't spend your time worrying about what other people think of you,
No,
and so
that's mhm.
you can't worry about petty things like that. You just have to focus on the things that you have to be living in the present and worried about what you're doing right now, not looking in the rearview mirror.
No, yeah. The Stoics would tell you, if they lived in the time of body cameras, they would just turn around and tell you, uh, what somebody else thinks about you is absolutely none of your business, and that if somebody dislikes you or doesn't respect you, that's not your business. But your only job is to not do anything that is disrespectful or anything that is embarrassing. That's the only thing you can control anyways, right? And that would be the Stoic dichotomy of control, of where really the only things in this world you have control over are the things that you do and say, not other people.
So um I'll just touch on one of my routines that I have, and I started. So
Sure.
I have I can't show you on the camera now, but I have in the corner of my office, my home office, I have a small little meditation chair, and I think I've had that thing for gotta be 7 or 8 years. And I started this process of trying to meditate, and I used to think I sucked at it.
Right.
And then it took me a while to realize that, well, there really is no sucking at it. It's
Right.
just the act of doing it is
Mhm.
is really what matters. And then just try not to beat yourself up over whether I suck at this or not. Am I doing it
Right.
right? Well, there's different techniques and there's different styles and there's
Mhm.
different outcomes that you can try to get from it. But I did that for a while, and then I started using a Muse headband to be able to kind of give me some data and give me some feedback. But it wasn't until I had worked with a coach, I worked with a performance coach, not from a sports perspective, but like an executive life coach,
Right.
where he had told me, he's like, have you ever read the Stoics? And I was like, well, I have. Like I read Ego is the Enemy was probably one of the first books that I had read that kind of introduced me to
Yeah.
some of these concepts and philosophies.
It's a great starter book. Yeah.
Yeah, it's one that I would highly encourage others to read, and then really even just sign up for his newsletter, the Daily Stoic, Ryan
Yes.
Holiday's, and of course we'll get to yours as well,
Sure.
for the Street Cop.
I'm no
But
Ryan Holiday now.
yeah, so
Yeah.
in terms of a routine, building into your daily routine, some mindfulness practice. I do some stretching in it, and then there is a part of it where I spend 10 minutes just reading the Stoics, or it can be anything really. I just choose to read the Stoics because, again, there's a lot of just ancient wisdom there.
Right.
What's old is new again, and not everything has to be ancient. Like I've got a couple here because there's some examples I wanted to bring up, but like
Yeah.
Stephen Pressfield, I don't know if you've read Stephen Pressfield's work, but do the work.
I
I think
haven't read it.
these are really quick reads
Hmm.
um, that I really find fascinating, and I can't even recommend this enough. And then after I had started reading meditations, there was a lot of references to Seneca in there, and
Oh yeah.
so I went and got this little one. It's called "On the Shortness of Life," and this is
Yes.
this is another really good starter, a good starter book for people that might be interested in it. But just 10 minutes. Not
Absolutely.
you don't have to sit. This is not stuff that you want to sit down and read for hours on end. You can. I mean, if it's engaging you or it's really causing some thought provocation within yourself and getting you to challenge yourself, then
Right.
great. But just just dedicating yourself. I'm going to just read like 2 or 3 pages at a time.
Yeah, and it's probably best that you do it that way, because some of the stuff is, one little passage can have a lot of implications to your life, and you want to take a minute and just, kind of sit with the idea for a minute and see what that means to you. And yeah, it's not something where you're just going to read it all and you're going to know it. It's something that we do every day. The Stoics, they equate it to almost like, living a healthy lifestyle. It's not like a medication you take all at once and then all of a sudden you're better. It's you eat healthy every day, you follow a healthy lifestyle every day. And that's how they suggest that you use the philosophy also as something that's ongoing, that's part of your life, not just a cure for something that's wrong.
Yeah. And the fascinating thing is you pick any of these books up and you start reading them. I'll read just a couple. Like I've got this on shortness. I've got a bunch of lines just this either highlighted or
Oh yeah.
underlined. And if it doesn't really matter which one I pick. If I just pick one and start reading it, and then think about like how does this impact me and how does it impact my
Right.
day? How do
Mhm.
does this relate to me as a professional police officer? Um, yeah, so here's this one part where I have it, and I'm not even going to go before or after.
Right.
Life is divided into 3 periods: past, present, and future. Of these, the present is short, the future is doubtful, and the past is certain. For this last is the one over which fortune has lost her power, which cannot be brought back to anyone's control. So, and if you read the next one, but this is what preoccupied people lose, for they have no time to look back at their past, and even if they did, it is not pleasant to recall activities that they are ashamed of. So we could
Right.
go back to, right, we were just talking about the body camera stuff, but past, present, and future.
Exactly. And like you said, it was that easy to draw a line from a random passage in Seneca to body cameras today.
Yep.
It's and that's all I do. I do the easiest thing in the world. I take a highly relevant philosophy and I hand it to cops because nobody else is doing it. And that's exactly, what you just did there. And Stoicism is full of those kind of correlations. Right? In fact, I started doing a little video series just recently. I call it Random Meditations, where I grab meditations and I go to a random page, I open it up, I read the chapter, and I go, okay, and this is how it applies to cops. It's like because you can do that pretty much any page of any of the Stoics.
And So a couple of other people you talked about when you first started down this path, like Jocko or David
Right.
Goggins. I mean, it's interesting because I think police officers tend to, people like that resonate with them because
Sure.
there's, it's very challenging, uh, lifestyle, and it's, putting yourself at risk, putting yourself out there. But Jocko's book, Extreme Ownership, really is, it's like a modern version of Stoicism. A lot of those lessons are really just baked in.
Yes.
If you really think extreme ownership, taking accountability and multiplying it by 1,000. Like
Right.
if you just learn to look at everything that you find yourself trying to make excuses for,
Right.
and then trying to accept it as you're like, okay, yep.
Yeah. Um,
It's amazing what starts to happen.
no, exactly. And I actually thought Jocko was just rebranding Stoicism. I actually watched a podcast where him and Ryan Holiday had a nice long conversation. And he said basically, because he does hard things and he, you know, is basically in danger, trying to live a very, disciplined life, that he came to the same answers that the Stoics did without having actually studied their material. And I thought that was great how, it's people who are trying to find the same answers can come to them from different directions, and so like Jocko's extreme ownership, that falls a lot in line with the Stoic concept of amor fati, which I just got. I don't know if you can see it.
Oh
Just got
yeah,
it
nice.
tattooed.
There you go.
Uh, so I want to see it 100 times a day, and that means love your fate or accept everything that happens. And it's not a far cry from extreme ownership, right? It's just applying that to yourself is what Jocko does. So
Yeah, and Brian Johnson did something. I don't know if you're familiar with Brian Johnson, but he has a similar one where he has arete tattooed on his arm. Um, that's interesting. All right. So there's a lot of, for somebody that's never read Meditations. What might be like a good piece of advice for them to think about, like as they start down this journey.
so as they start to, if they want to get into
Yeah, like,
reading the
hey, I'm
Stoics
curious. I want
and
to learn. I want to learn more. Like, hey, this is resonating with me. Like, because if you jump in and just try, like I said earlier, if you just try to jump in and like read a chapter,
right,
you might just fry yourself out on day one.
yeah, and you might, and there's a lot of good books out there on Stoicism. There's one I'm reading right now, Stoicism and the Art of Happiness, and the author is Donald Robertson. And I don't know if you can see how many notes I have in this book, uh, but what I would suggest is this: before you get into reading Seneca or Epictetus or Marcus Aurelius, pick up one of the more modern books where it is spoon fed to you and you can understand the concepts so that when you do, because there's really only 4 or 5 main concepts in Stoicism, and then a whole bunch of like techniques that you can practice. But if you understand the main concepts like amor fati, memento mori, the dichotomy of control, or the discipline of aversion and attraction, if you can understand those things, then when you're reading through Meditations, it's going to make a lot more sense to you, and you can see what he's getting at. But yeah, that's what I would suggest is go ahead and get a Stoicism for Dummies kind of books. Uh, you, that's how I started my book. Before I get into explaining everything about how to apply this to police work, I basically just give an overview of the main concepts, and that way you're not lost or just trying to figure out you know why this guy's saying it's your fault that you're miserable or whatever, because it might sound, without being versed in it a little bit, you might be like, hey, this guy's being mean to me, and he's not. He's just telling you everything's under your control. So if you're happy, that's within your control. If you're upset, that's within your control also. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Yeah, which is interesting because in today's world, right? And I like to point this out, like with millennials were raised by Gen Xers, right?
Right,
So,
right.
and if we want to point the finger again at anybody, we really kind of need to point it, for me, for people in my, that's the baby boomers have aged
Right,
out, the Gen Xers, and those now this new generation is coming up. It does at times feel like people don't want to accept responsibility for themselves and for their actions, and that they want to hand over control of these things to other people.
right,
And Jonathan Haidt, in his book, The Coddling of the American Mind,
right.
they really hit on this concept of safetyism.
Uh-huh.
That and safetyism, it means a lot of things, but it's for, if you haven't read that book, I strongly encourage people to read it, especially police officers, police leaders, when you're trying to understand this generation. It's a great book to read. But when you turn over the responsibility for your own happiness and your own safety,
Right,
then you're always relying on somebody else to give it to you. And
exactly.
when you really kind of think on that for a minute, it's like, okay, that's going to be problematic.
Right. You're gonna be miserable. That person can never give you enough validation. They can never give you everything you need. And even if they do, it's going to lose all value to you pretty quickly. So,
So for a police officer, right? For a young police officer, and you get exposed, you like, maybe you've only been on the job for a couple of years, or you're just starting, and you're in a community where maybe there's a lot of anti-police rhetoric. There's a lot of stuff on social media. There's things on in the newspaper. There, if you live in a university town, right? There's
right.
always a
Mhm.
bunch of academics that always know better about what you should be doing and how you should
Right.
be doing it, even though they've never spent a day in a squad car. Um, you can really kind of start to I think give in to some of that negativity.
Sure. Sure.
And so what would be, maybe what is a strategy for a young police officer now studying the Stoics? What do you think that they can gain from it that's going to improve their performance on the job?
So, yeah, I mean,
It's
that's
a big
probably a whole,
question, but
yeah, that's probably a whole nother podcast. What they're going to get, the most immediate results you're going to get is increased resiliency. Um, there's a university that does something called Stoic Week, where they give college students basically a little handbook, and they say, "Hey, this is Stoicism. Here's the basics. Read this, practice it. Come back in a week. Try to use it. Come back in a week. Tell us how you feel." And pretty consistently, these are like Berkeley kind of college students, and even they are saying, oh yeah, I feel about 15%, less anxious. I feel 20% more confident or more resilient. And that's one of the first things that police officers are, we're already a tougher people that kind of accept a lot of these things to start with. So we're not going to have that hurdle of like, I'm responsible for my actions, right? We're not going to have to fight that. Or like the concept of, being a good person will ultimately lead you to be a happy person. We're a little more comfortable with that than I think probably the average person is. So immediately, police officers are going to start to experience a little more resiliency, and they're going to care less about the negatives. Uh, all the little negatives are just they're not going to hit you as hard. You're going to be more aware of the fact that this is something that's outside of your control, and therefore you don't have to worry about it. Uh, Moving forward, there's a lot of benefits as far as the techniques as dealing with stress and dealing with those critical incidents or the hot calls, things like that. There's a lot of stuff that you can practice in stoicism that'll help you be better at your job. And once you realize like, oh, this can actually help me handle a robbery call, or I can this thing I had a problem with before, all of a sudden it's not a problem. Or I always say like turn the dial. It's 20% less difficult. Once you have those realizations, you won't need Steve to tell you about stoicism anymore, because you'll go buy every book on Amazon and you'll consume it because you realize the value of
well, when they do that, hopefully they'll start with your book, right? Street
it.
Stoic.
Yes, hopefully they
Yeah.
you know my book should probably be somewhere around the beginning of your journey because it is fairly basic as far as Stoicism books goes. I wanted to make it very accessible so that anybody could just pick it up and run with it.
Well, I want to touch on it because the first part cracked me up. Like as we're talking about the new generation, the trigger warnings and disclaimers.
Yes. Yeah.
So the first warnings, the author takes no responsibility. That's funny. He takes no responsibility for any of your jacked up decisions or any part of your life. All of your actions, opinions, and thoughts are outside of his control.
Yes. Yeah. And you could tell I was deep down the Stoic rabbit hole when I wrote that. And, but, I teach this to young people and I teach this to newer cops. And that is the first thing you need to hear is, look, I'm not responsible for your bullshit. That's, I can't fix you. You can fix you. You can use this to fix yourself, but Steve can't do it. And if you want to be offended, you're going to be offended within the first page. I promise you that if you don't reach 10 pages in and you're not offended, like, then you probably don't want to be that offended. But it's if you want to be pissed off about something I wrote, it's in there. I promise you.
So the second trigger warning is profanity, right?
Right. Yeah.
This book has bad words and takes a hard look at reality. If you want to be offended, you came to the right place.
Absolutely.
Now, if you're somebody that is offended by profanity, like policing might be a difficult place to work, right? Because you're going to get it everywhere you go. And It might not be from your supervisor or your coworkers. It's for certain going to be people that you deal with when you hit the street. And it's not a matter of if it happens to you. It's when, how frequently, and how vehemently they spew their poison at you.
Right. Yeah, I mean it's street Stoic. It's not ivory tower Stoic, right? It's not church choir Stoic. If you're on the street, you're going to hear street language, and you're going to deal with street shit. That's what happens on the street shit. So we need to accept it on those terms.
Well, and in this day of social media, all these different platforms, Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, Facebook, you name it, whatever the ones I haven't. Mm-hmm. It's interesting to me. I don't spend nearly as much time on there as I used to, but it's easy to get sucked down into the rabbit hole from time to time. But one of the things that I'll challenge people on is watch any thread. It doesn't matter if it's on Facebook, or if it's on Twitter. Somebody can say something really positive.
Right.
And it usually only takes 3 to 5 comments before it goes the complete opposite direction. So by the time you get to like 30 comments down, everything is devolved into an argument. And generally the argument is no longer even anything related to what the original quote might have been or what the topic might have been. Now, some people just throw stuff out there just to stir the pot, but so it's a great example. Police officers have experienced this from day one. Like it's this counterintuitive type of approach that people take, and just extreme lack of accountability or any refusal to take any responsibility for actions. And that's something I think cops I think have an advantage over the general population because they see it more frequently. And for young cops, especially if you come from a fairly guarded environment, when you get exposed to that at first, it can be difficult to overcome.
Yeah, and I just got done teaching a group of new hires. They just got out of the academy and they're getting ready to come work for our agency. So I sit them down and I'm like, all right, guys, I'm about to tell you some stories from the street and tell you about Stoicism. And, we start talking about, I start out by talking about, generational issues and some of the stuff that we're dealing with, and in the front row, there's a kid sitting there and he's got a baby face. And I'm like, all right, who's the youngest, and I can already see him looking down and he just starts shaking his head. And I said, hey man, don't worry. I'm not going to talk about your generation. Are you worried about that? And he said, oh, no. I'll talk about them too. They're weak, and uh, so well, you're here, right? Like you know what this is. Like you're in this day and age with everything that's in the media and everything going on. You had the courage to sign up to do this job, and so yeah, I agree with you. You're probably not one of them, and you probably are, standing apart. And a lot of time, he was so happy to hear some of the stoic things about, uh, take responsibility for your own actions, and no, we're not going to be offended by every little thing, and uh, what somebody else thinks, that's their business. So like hearing all these things and understanding like our culture was one of, we're going to be a little tougher, we're going to be a little more resilient, we're going to be a little more responsible. He was actually heartened by that, and I think a lot of them, they crave it so bad. They Nobody is telling them, you know they're responsible for anything, or uh, when they screw up, they know they screw up, but they don't get any kind of correction. Nobody wants to say anything. Everybody is so hands off that they appreciate truth to a degree that other generations don't. They would, you think maybe you're criticizing them a little bit, and they actually appreciate it because you're being honest with them, and they don't get a lot of honesty.
Yeah. Wow. That's pretty interesting. And that could take us down a whole different conversation.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to try to avoid it.
Right? No, no, we have multiple rabbit holes to step around here.
Yes. But for those, and I've talked a lot about this, for those of us inside this, and I'm guilty of this. I have not been an advocate for people that are closest to me to come into the profession.
Right.
Like I haven't been the one going out and saying, hey, you should do this. Now, if somebody comes to me and says, hey, I'm thinking about this, yeah, I'm generally very candid with them, and I'll tell them exactly what I think, but I'm not discouraging. I wouldn't tell them not to do it.
Right.
Um, but I don't necessarily actively go out and try to find people. And the interesting thing, the quandary that puts us in policing is that when I ask a lot of chiefs and other people in the profession about that too, like, would you advocate for your own children to enter the profession? And almost everybody is saying no. And conversely, they're really just saying, please go do anything but this.
Right.
So it's really like the concept of safetyism is on full display right there. Like, I don't want you to be exposed to things that are going to be difficult and dangerous and challenging. And it's almost like we're denying a generation of the hero's journey. Like,
Exactly. Exactly. And yeah, that to take the hardship from them, to protect them from everything, they how are they supposed to develop? How are they supposed you do not get experience by proxy, right? You can't hear my war story and get the same experience that I got from that war story. Or else, like, everybody who came out of a police academy would be like a 10-year vet because all the war stories they hear, right?
right.
Like, it you have to
20-year
go
vet, because half the shit they're
yeah.
hearing isn't true, right?
Yeah, there would be.
Depends on how much time has elapsed since.
Yeah.
I'm not only am I a veteran cop, but I'm also Irish, right? So
Right. Yeah, the criminals get bigger every year, and the guns get longer, and yeah. No, but and that's what's happening to a lot of them. They're going from helicopter parents to helicopter supervision, and uh, it shows.
and
It
no
shows.
room to make mistakes. And that's the problem.
Right.
That's the part that society sometimes doesn't get, is like, you can't, there is no such thing as perfection. There's
Right.
there's the pursuit of perfection, but you're never going to get there. And we're putting a lot of pressure on police officers, and especially young police officers, to be perfect. And then we're filming them the whole time. And then
Right.
when there's a mistake, it's gotcha.
Exactly. And it's I wonder if people realize how much they're only paying these officers, because you're expecting Jason Bourne, and you're expecting Matlock, the lawyer, and you're expecting, Sylvester Stallone and, Mike Tyson all in one, as far as, capabilities. And you're paying them like 40 something $1,000 a year. You want them to be like a legal scholar and a badass and be able
And
to
you're making them work
disarm.
midnights for 20
Yeah,
years.
like,
No sleep on top of that.
like, whatever happened to you get what you pay for, you know, like you're not paying for that guy. And good thing, because we can't produce those people, not without. I mean, we can, after 10 or 15 years, a cop can be to a very high level, but it's going to take a lot of mistakes to get them there. They're going to learn a lot of things the hard way before they become that person. And if we hammer them to death because of body camera views and just litigiousness, they'll never get there. Either they'll quit or they'll get terminated. So
Yeah, and good luck living in a city that doesn't really support its police. I think
no.
we're seeing firsthand, and it's kind of interesting to me to watch how people try to make excuses for what's happening in these cities,
Mm-hmm.
like, oh well, just give it some more time. It's like, yeah, we can give it more time to watch it
Right.
get worse,
Yeah.
and we will. Um, anyway, I digress. But that's kind of like, but the hero's journey, right? That's kind of where like a story like, a guy like Jocko seemed to have figured it out really, really early on in life, and then
Right.
just kind of like picked away at it. Where, interestingly enough, another Navy SEAL like David Goggins came to it from a completely different
Sure.
way, pathway, where he, just had a very difficult childhood. And, I think he would be the first one that would tell you that he made a lot of excuses for himself.
Right.
And, he was taking the easy path. And I still remember, him telling that story in his first book where, he found himself, he had, you know, been serving at a very high level in the Air Force and then got out. And now
Right.
he's working for a pest control
He fell
business,
off. Yeah.
yes, spraying for roaches,
Uh-huh.
working the midnight shift. He ballooned up to 300
Right.
pounds. And when people look at him today, they think, oh my gosh, um, no way.
Right.
And that's always the interesting thing as well, is that people, when they see the end result, they don't appreciate the journey.
Correct.
They don't appreciate everything that it took for him to get where he is. And
Mm-hmm.
so now for a guy like Goggins, who maybe in his youth made a lot of excuses to himself, at some point when he had that realization and stopped making excuses,
Right.
he ultimately began to understand what his true potential was,
Yeah.
and that there really were no boundaries. And that's kind of it's a everybody's going to get to that lesson in a little bit different way. And I don't know that we ever get there entirely. I think we're all learning as we go.
Right.
But interesting juxtaposition.
Yeah, and I really enjoy, about him, and something I've tried to take from him is, about telling your story, warts and all. Don't he doesn't try to make himself sound like anything other than he is. And he talks about how he was in that victim mentality for a long time and how he clawed his way out of it. And I really appreciate that about him, because he doesn't tell that myth of, oh, I've just been this amazing person the whole time and look at me how great I am. It's, I was nothing, and I very slowly, methodically built my way up. And that's what people need to hear, is that it is possible through hard work.
Yeah, and I know there's all, it's always interesting. Like once people build themselves up too, then people just try to tear them right back down. And
Right.
that's that external. I think even in his own community, he's a pretty controversial type
Right.
of figure just because of how outspoken he is and what he does for a living now. But you can't deny, regardless of what you think about him, right? You can't deny that his efforts have paid off, right? Like
Oh
he
yeah.
is, and he's got a great message that he shares with others, and there's a lot of inspiration if you allow it.
Yeah.
You can really learn a lot from people like him.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you just think about, if I could ever inspire 1% as many people as David Goggins has, like, I will consider it a life well lived. I mean, so many people have started their journeys because of him. So
Speaking of David Goggins, right? You know, what's he do? He runs these endurance races. And if for those that haven't read his story, go out, you know, he's got a couple of different books. In his first book, he kind of tells the story about, you know, how he became a Navy SEAL, some of the things
mhm.
he overcame, but then also how he became an endurance racer.
Right.
And like, where he, you know, he's just like, oh, well, once he developed that mindset, well, I can pretty much do anything. You know, he convinced himself to do things that he probably shouldn't have done, but he did
Right.
anyway. Yeah, like, oh, you know, run 100 miles. Okay, I can run 100 miles, and then
Mhm.
just going out to a track and just running around it for a day. You know, like
Yeah.
23 hours straight. You know, giving himself, you know, fractures in both his shins, and you
Yep.
know, pissing blood for a couple days. Like, all
Yeah.
right, well, maybe that wasn't smart, but so you on your own journey, like when you started down this path of stoicism, you decided to say, hey, like I'm gonna take no days off. I'm gonna run every day. Tell us what that was.
Sure. So part of it, it's not something I invented. I read Cameron Hayes's book, Endure, and
Oh yeah, I
he
got that one right here too. I love that book.
so he talks about applying endurance sports and working out towards bow hunting. And I was like, you know what, that's pretty brilliant. I go out, I do covert operations. I dress in plain clothes and get out on foot quite often, and or on bike, and I uh, just follow people around and basically wind up chasing burglars all through the city at night. And I was like, you know what, I could apply endurance sports to what I do too, right? Because I'm often on foot chasing somebody who's on a bike, or having to run down somebody who's literally half my age, and less than half my age. So, well, I had already been running a little bit, just following stoicism and all that. And I was getting into the idea of intentionally doing hard things or undergoing difficulties on purpose to just build up your resiliency and to make yourself a little bit tougher. So I was like, you know what? Great idea. It all just clicked, challenge accepted. So I'm just going to run every single day. And, one of the things Cam says is, your body will give you what you expect out of it or what you ask out of it, but it will only give you what you ask out of it. So I said, all right, let me see if that works for me. And I just dedicated myself to running every single day. And it doesn't matter if it's raining, it doesn't matter. There was a hurricane one day, I ran in that. Christmas morning, if it's cold, if it's my anniversary, if it's my birthday, actually on special occasions, I'll go a little harder and do extra, because that's when you want to take the day off, right? It's my birthday, I deserve a treat. No, you that's when you want to go harder, right? You want to, when you feel like you need a break, or when you need that, little, it's a special day, treat yourself special by doing more and making yourself better. That's how you treat yourself special. So yeah, I started doing that, and it's paid off. I've lost a lot of weight. I've uh, i've really started being able to do a lot more things with the officers that work for me, so I, because I go out and run in the rain or run in the elements, usually like 5 hours before work, I've already been up and put myself through the ringer. So, if one of my cops is like stuck on a perimeter, it is nothing for me to go replace them, because, standing in the rain for 5 minutes is nothing to me at that point. I've already been through so much more. Or, when my boss like starts asking me to do stuff, nothing they can ask me to do is going to be any harder than what I've already voluntarily put myself through that morning. So by raising the bar intentionally, like, you get a lot of benefit out of it. And so yeah, I'm going for a year at this point. It won't be too long. I only got a couple months to go, and I probably won't quit there. I'm 46 years old. I just hit 46. I am 5'5". I am naturally disposed, whatever. My body wants to be fat. Like, I could walk past a pizza place and gain 10 pounds just by smelling it. So running is not my gig, but I want to show that you don't need rest days. You don't need all that recovery time. all your limitations are in your head. And if you would just believe for a second that you can get out there and you can push past, all these little bullshit uh, limitations that you're imposing upon yourself, like you'll find out you're capable of doing a lot more. And for me, you say you meditate every day, and you spend time doing that. When I go out and run in nature, that's my meditation. That's where I find that my clarity and my headspace is on my daily run. So it has a lot of benefits, and I enjoy it.
Well, there's a lot of psychology behind that too. The challenges like that, the which is awesome. I'm really proud of you for doing that, because
Thank you.
You learn a lot when you do stuff like that. And this summer I'm actually helping at my son's high school doing some strength and conditioning stuff in the mornings with all the high school athletes. And Monday morning, it's cold, it's a little bit rainy,
Right?
and you could just tell the vibe, like, I don't know, I just don't want to be here, right? Like,
right. Yeah.
Or should we be out here? It's raining. Like, should we be out in the rain? It's just like,
Yeah.
well,
you're not made out of sugar.
This is the best time to train, right?
Right.
This is
Yeah.
like, especially, it's like, I sure don't want to hear any of the football players complain, right? Like, oh, well, it's cold and rainy today. Oh, well, let's cancel the game, right?
Right.
That's just not how life works. But the more recent challenge I did was last year I did a cold shower. I did the Wim Hof cold shower stuff. He's got if you jump on his app, you can do, it's like 8 weeks where you do cold showers every day. And the first time you jump into a cold shower, I'm not going to go into all the physiology on this podcast about why cold exposure can be very beneficial to emotional regulation and just recovery and a lot of other things. But imagine, right now, if you haven't taken a cold shower in a long time, just turning the water on as cold as it can be and then stepping right into that shower, that that'll wake you up. It'll suck the air right out of you. You get you get that big adrenaline dump. But by the end of 8 weeks, when you do that, when you gradually just at the end of your shower, turn it on for 10 seconds and then go to 20 seconds and then go to 30 seconds. And after 8 weeks, you can step into a cold shower. Like you can just step into it. And most people would think like, oh my, there's just no way I can't do it.
Right.
And why would anyone do that? And for a couple reasons. One, because just the idea and the thought, and this is kind of one of the things that's always motivated me, is like just the idea and the thought of like me telling myself, oh man, I don't want to do that, or I can't do that. It's like, well, shit, now I got to do it. Like, because now
otherwise do something that scares you, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So this year I did cold plunge for 90 days. And,
nice.
I love it. Now it's gotten too warm. It's pretty pointless at this point, but now I've got to, I'm going to kind of build my own, I got to buy a chiller, and I've been looking at these homemade formulas, but at the end of December up here in Indiana, it was pretty damn cold. Right. So there were days where, before I bought a little de-icer, I would have to knock the ice out of that thing, break it up, and go outside when it's 0 degrees and it's windy, and go out in my backyard and dunk myself, in my bathing suit and dunk into that cold water. It doesn't seem like that's a really smart thing to do. And I think people look at you like, what the hell? Yeah. But, and I've had a lot of people asking me like, what was the most difficult thing, or what do you think you benefited the most from it? And if you read Susanna Soberg's work about cold exposure and about activating brown fat and things, there's physiology behind why you should do something like this. But for me, the biggest benefit was number one, you want to talk about an energy activation system. Like there's nothing's, and if you'll get it for a couple of hours, like I mean, it'll wire you up for a couple of hours. But the discipline of going out and doing something hard like that every day, psychologically speaking,
absolutely,
was the biggest benefit that I got from it. And so going back and I wasn't necessarily associating it with some of the Stoicism that I had been reading, but I had one day when I was literally sitting out there, like trying to get to the point where, all right, 30 seconds the first day, I got to a
Right.
minute the second day. Within 3 or 4 days, I got to 2 minutes. And then it was like, okay, well, how long can I go? And so
Yeah.
like one day, like within the first month, I got up to 11 minutes
Wow.
where I sat at. Then now I realized, and then listening to some of Andrew Huberman's work, he's like, either like 12 minutes per week is really the maximum effective dose. Anything above that, there's the data is not really suggesting that there's added benefit. So I'm like, okay, well, maybe I'm going too far. But for me,
Yeah.
it was just the idea of doing it and
Right.
trying to convince myself that I can do something hard.
Well, yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of value in that, right? And just deciding you're going to do something hard than actually doing it, right? Because so many people these days just talk about what they're going to do, or they say, "Oh, I oughta," and they never follow through. And just doing that, the sense of pride you have in yourself is, just worth doing it by itself. And I've done the cold shower thing, and I think, like, to me, my experience was, it is one of the easiest ways to introduce panic into your psyche, right? Like, you can just hop in there and you want to panic, you want to pull away, you want to jump out of that shower, and making yourself breathe and calm down and stay in the moment and stay in that shower, even though it's cold and you're freaking out a little bit, is a great exercise for police officers, because that's what happens. Like, we go from 0 to 100 just like that. And you have to realize, like, the difference between a good street cop and one who's kind of a mess is somebody who can recognize when they're panicking or when they're in that moment, and then can take steps to calm themselves down and still perform under pressure. And that is a great way to put yourself into that, just low cost, low risk. Like, worst thing you do is fall on your butt in a shower, like, nobody loses their life, but you can introduce that panic into your mind and learn how to control it. And that's something you can just do at home, and nobody's judging you, nobody's watching you, nobody's listening to you on the radio. You're not getting an evaluation at the end of the year. It's you against you. And if you can do that, if you can learn how to take that breath and calm down, just when you get hit with that cold water, next time you're under a situation at work where, oh shit, something's happening, you'll recognize that sensation. Oh, that's the panic. What did I do when I was in the shower? I breathed. I took a breath and I told myself it was going to be okay, and it was. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, the one caveat being that if you have certain heart conditions, then yes, it
Yeah.
could actually kill you.
Sure. I guess we have to say that.
Yeah, we'll say
Yeah.
that for today. So
Yeah.
before you do deliberate cold exposure, make sure you understand the risk.
Yeah.
I'm not advocating that you do it.
Yeah.
All right. So we've been going for a while here.
All right.
I want to wrap this up.
Sure.
We're gonna have to do part two,
Absolutely.
but I do want to give you a quick shout out. His book is fantastic. Street Stoic, Ancient Philosophy, Modern Policing, and I think anyone that's been listening already, I think, is going to understand the value that Stoicism brings. And I really do appreciate all the work that you've put into this book. So what else do you have that for people that are interested in your work or interested in Stoicism? Where else can they find you?
Absolutely. So I try to approach it from a few different ways. And my mission in life is just to get Stoicism into the hands of as many law enforcement officers as humanly possible. Like, that's what I care about. So if you buy the book, great. It helps support the cause. It's available on Amazon Prime. You can have it pretty much the next day, pretty much anywhere in the country. It's $20. It's a small investment. Uh, if you don't have the money, or you don't want to buy anything, that's fine too. I have a free website for all police officers. It's streetstoic.com. You don't have to sign up. You don't have to enter your email. There's no fees associated with it. And there I have links and articles and resources and just everything you can imagine to get you started. So if you don't get it from me, get it somewhere. I link to other places. I've partnered with a friend who has a podcast, Bryce Lee. He runs a podcast called the Stoic Sentinel. and he and I together, we do a newsletter. Uh, so it's a weekly newsletter. It's called Bravo One, or uh, and basically it's just a weekly newsletter that we take turns. We alternate weeks writing the articles, and we send them out to anybody who wants to sign up. And you can find the link for that on my website, also streetstoic.com. It you know just a little something to read in your inbox whenever you have time. I also have a training company, so if there's a training coordinator or chief or sheriff that says, "Oh, hey, I really want my officers or deputies to have the benefit of this stuff," reach out to me. My email address is steve@streetstoic.com. Shoot me an email. I'll be glad to work something out with you. I'm not trying to get rich. I'll probably be the cheapest training you ever book. I love to come and talk. I mean, if you can't tell, I could talk about stoicism all day long. And I love to come and talk with cops and coach them and help them figure out some of this stuff. And, pretty much everybody I've ever talked to said they got some benefit from it. So those are all the things I'm trying to do, and approach it from, those 3 different routes.
That's awesome. One of the things that I like to touch on a lot is, the concept of leading yourself first. You can't lead others until you lead yourself, and leading yourself can be the most difficult challenge.
Yes.
Sometimes it's easy to expect more from others than it is from ourselves. And that's, therein lies the challenge. And I think therein lies the opportunity in which Stoicism can bring a lot to improving the professional culture of police departments and policing in general. Nothing. None of our problems today are new.
Right.
They're just not. We may think there might be new little twists, but it's on an ancient theme.
Absolutely. And Marcus Aurelius, he said, be strict with yourself and tolerant with others. And that's how I try to approach my leadership and, my dealings with other people. Is everybody's human. Not everybody has the same experience as I do. And I just need to worry about myself and be the best version of myself that I can be. And if nothing else, if somebody else isn't living up to whatever I think they're supposed to be, I can be a good example for maybe they can set their sights on it.
All right, let's end it on that.
Sure.
Be strict with yourself and tolerant of others. Ancient wisdom from Marcus Aurelius. All right.
Thank you,
Steve. Appreciate you spending some of your valuable time with us. This has been an awesome episode. Looking forward to maybe doing this again in the future.
Anytime.
All right, everybody. Until the next time, we'll be 1042. Unleash your full potential today and get started with Performance Protocol. Remember, performance is the goal. Protocol is the path. Log into www.performance-protocol and learn more about how to bring this program to your agency and community.